Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky angle where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new mixtape or album, whatever, from Flume. Hi, this is Flume. So apparently people are still interested in my thoughts on this guy. I'm not sure how exactly, but okay, sure. Flume, Harley Streeton, cult favorite producer that I've had a complicated history with, to say the very least. I guess as a recap, long intro incoming, sorry. This guy so far put out 2 albums and 2 EPs. The first album, his self-titled in 2012, showed a strange blend of experimental, Fly-Low-esque styles with some more modern hip-hop-ish production, kinda like those you'd find on a Pretty Lights album, maybe. People were really taken by how absolutely off-the-wall it sounded without being uninviting or hard to listen to. I personally found it to be kind of dull and felt like the people who influenced him could do these kinds of sounds better. And on top of that, we now live in a post-Odessa world where the sounds explored on here aren't really as fresh and striking as they used to be. But still, this album had its moments, and I could give it points for originality if nothing else. I was already going against the grain with my thoughts on that thing, but that was nothing compared to when his second album, Skin, dropped in 2016. This album marked a turn for the commercial, combining his usual experimental style with more mainstream pop. For most people, from what I understand at least, Skin was an absolute breath of fresh air in the world of mainstream pop and electronic, combining the two worlds in such a unique and easily recognizable way that could be sometimes epic and expansive, but also absolutely nuts and instrumentally random. It was met with tons of praise and even a Grammy. Because of course it won a Grammy. For me personally though, I could not stand the album at all. I found it significantly worse than the debut, and in a really non-specific way that I couldn't really put into words. When I posted my video on it, I mainly just wanted to get people off my back and hadn't really fully formed my thoughts on it. And the result is by far my most hated video ever. I got covered in dislikes and angry comments for several months on end. I think I even got a death threat once. But I don't actually regret that video at all. If nothing else, it was certainly a good learning experience on how much the internet loves underdeveloped hot takes. Now, did the mob actually change my opinions on Skin? Not really, but they did convince me to think it over more. Again, I can give it points for originality. He has a sound that you can't mistake for anyone else, but I think that album cribbed from the elements of experimental and pop music that I personally least enjoy. It was just experimental enough to be hard for me to listen to, but not out of the box enough for me to be floored by its creativity. It was poppy in the sense that it felt super high budget and flashy and catering to a more mainstream audience, but it wasn't particularly catchy or infectious or really made me feel anything. I just found it to be a tedious, samey, unfulfilling mess that really only succeeded in turning my stomach. Oh yeah, and there were 2 more EPs afterwards to add on to Skin that I guess had their moments, but I don't ever really think about. So yeah, sorry for that long intro. I guess that brings us to this latest mixtape, which I heard was going to mark a turn for him into straight experimental music, with guest appearances from people like Sophie. People were saying, oh, come on, you'll like this one this time. This'll be the one to finally change your mind. You'll finally like Flume after this like you're actually supposed to, you stupid dipshit. Even Fantano gave it a freaking 8, because of course he did. Got me excited with that red flannel though. I'm still kinda bewildered that through all of this I still got anyone excited to hear my thoughts on a new release from this guy, but here we are. I finally broke down, interrupted my progress on covering Matmos and Frontline Assembly, and just sat through this latest mixtape with a kinda open mind. I heard the weird intro with him saying his name over and over and I was like, okay, get on with it. And then we got into that first track, Ecdysis, and I heard the loud and abrasive beats contrasting with these pretty cool harp sounds, and I was like, I actually kinda like this. The track may not even been 2 minutes long, but there weren't any elements that came up in the mix that I found irritating or took me out of the experience. And we got another solid track on High Beams featuring a rapper called Slow Tie, who is maybe the first time I've heard a rap guest feature on a Flume track whose performance was disorienting enough to actually match the beat behind him and enhance the track. Flume would probably work well with a Danny Brown feature at some point. And despite the complete lack of melody in the sections with the rapping, some was brought in with the parts where there wasn't rapping, and that all sounded pretty good. And then the next track, Jewel, I liked that too. The melodic elements were glitchy and strange, but they weren't so off the wall and abrasive that I couldn't get into them. There were nice, cool ambient sections with all these neat reverb-covered bleeping sound effects, and the drops, while flatter and choppier sounding than the rest of the track, still kept up the momentum, I guess. At this point, I was just like, Jesus Christ, I might actually like an entire Flume project. After an interlude of glitchy voice samples that's not really worth discussing, we then got Dreamtime, and I was like, fuck, I like this too! Mostly made up of this really cold and windy sounding ambient pad with various elements slowly being piled up on top of each other. I was really taken by how so far all of this project was actually delivering enough melody and atmosphere to go along with all the experimental elements that I could actually get into it. Maybe not the most amazing stuff in the world, but it was blowing my expectations out of the water. And speaking of water, we then got his remix of Sophie's Is It Cold in the Water, which was alongside, who's the other guy? Eprom. Is It Cold in the Water was already one of my favorite tracks from Sophie's last album, last year. And for a while I was like, okay, this sounds exactly like the original, but it fits really well into the vibe of the album so far. And a little before the 2-minute mark, the track just... It was at this point that my enjoyment of this album took a major nosedive and never fully recovered. Once all those sounds started just glitching up, it sounded like I was gonna have to restart my computer. It felt like this remix just fell on its face. He had me for a while. Those first 6 tracks actually pulled me in nicely, and there are a couple of moments here and there after this where I still ended up enjoying myself, but for the most part, Flume delivered track after track of wall-fuck style experimentalism that, were not my thing. I absolutely get why people would be into this kind of stuff. It was always consistently weird sounding enough that I can easily see people enjoying it all on that level, but it just wasn't that fun for me to listen to. Like, I didn't really care for the track with JPEG Mafia. His performance was fine, but would probably be more enjoyable if it weren't on top of a beat that is, like, impossible to effectively flow over. And the first couple of seconds of the track, he sounded like a voiceover on a Spotify commercial. It's just like, And most of the other tracks, I guess, had cool ideas that I could respect, but I couldn't really get into. It felt like Flume was going out of his way to make sure that nothing on this album formed any sort of danceable groove. Anytime it sounded like he was developing a beat that you could tap your foot to, he'd follow it up with a whole bunch of completely rhythmless abrasive noises. You got tracks like Mud, which I have no idea why anyone would want to listen to. Just really awful sounding Steve Aoki style wall of synth pads, forming super dissonant and sour and screechy chords and just fading in and out of reality alongside ridiculously overblown kick drums that just crash through everything in the mix. Or 71M3, where its forward reversed voice samples just kinda gave me a headache more than anything, as did the screechy melodic textures of Amber and Vitality. And we got plenty of interludes where I maybe would like one element, but there'd be a bunch of other elements where they felt like they were clashing with the rest of the mix, and pretty consistently, the percussion textures were probably the worst thing about any given track. Not only were they all sounds I'd heard before in your typical modern trap productions, they were always mixed way higher than anything else in the tracks and just made everything sound messier. For instance, I liked the washes of beeping in the beginning of Upgrade, the vocal performances on the closer, Spring, and some of the melodic textures around Wormhole, but there'd just be some other abrasive percussive element coming in that I couldn't really get into, or Flume would bury the elements I liked in a bunch of offbeat elements I wasn't as keen on, and not let the parts I liked get a chance to shine. Okay, at least in the case of Wormhole, the melodic textures were prominent enough to make up for it. That was one of the better tracks for me, but I didn't really care for the way it started, with all these random percussion noises not forming any kind of rhythm or structure for like a good 30 seconds, and I was just like, what, is this a joke? There were 2 tracks left that I liked pretty much the whole way through. I liked Voices with Sophie and Kuka, or however you say that. Well, the intro was but once the vocals came in, the track became a lot more engaging. There'd be these choir pads in the background that sounded pretty great, and the outro with all the flutes was pretty cool too. And the other one I really liked was Daze 22.00, which had a lot of great melodic textures from pianos and harps and flutes and other random, maybe orchestral noises that I thought really came together in a beautiful way. But that's about all I got out of this project. I really liked parts of it. I also liked how it formed a continuous mix in many parts and how a lot of these tracks work to complement each other. I can definitely see why a bunch of people are calling it his best project yet. But as usual, I tend not to be into these kinds of more abrasive styles of experimental music, so the majority of this project kinda fell flat for me. It felt like what Flume was doing was taking a whole bunch of the synth tones you can find in more mainstream EDM projects of the last couple of years, chopping them up into a gazillion pieces and just dumping all those pieces all over the floor in an incoherent mess. Again, I can see why people would find that appealing. I guess this is definitely deconstructed club. But, I don't know, the particular synth and percussion textures on display were the main thing that's kept me from enjoying this project as much as I'd like. Not just the complete lack of structure or groove. I mean, I enjoy me some One Tricks Point Never, and Future Sound of London. I really like Arca's first album. I'm not inherently against the idea of formless and structureless pieces like these. Hell, I mentioned that that new Matmos will be getting a video, and spoilers, I enjoyed that way more than this. But the weirdness of this particular project isn't enough to pull me in by itself, and only in a couple of moments, mostly in the beginning, was I actually pulled into Flume's usual style. This isn't an album I feel like I can get angry at, or that I feel like I didn't get. Hell, I feel like I get his appeal more on this project than on any of his previous ones. Might even technically be my favorite project of his to date. Even though I'm not going to be giving this as high a rating as I gave the first Skin Companion EP, which in retrospect I was probably too nice to, thanks to lowered expectations and fear of incoming hate mobs. The fact that I have absolutely zero urge to listen to that again probably says something. This album is probably the one of his that I'd be most okay with listening to again in the future. But I still think this thing is at best a giant mixed bag that probably averages out to okay. And I'm not actually likely to listen to this again or think about it that much either, even if I'll admit it had its moments. It's cool, but you can keep it. I'm overall feeling a solid 6 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. There are some people you want to add yourself to that list or make me review something. Link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.